Good day, my name is Blue Suit and today I'll be going over my review of the action-adventure crafting and farming RPG simulator known as Kitaria Fables. In Kitaria Fables, you play as Nyanza, a knight of the Empire charged with protecting the residents of Paul Village from the growing ominous threat of an ensuing calamity. You'll meet the endearing citizens of Kitaria and help them with odd jobs and quests while unveiling the world's lore and slaying countless monsters along the way. Kitaria Fables attempts to combine action-focused RPG elements with farm life crafting sims along a story-driven narrative. And while there are many ways it succeeds, it also comes with a long list of downsides and questionable design choices that is really going to curb a lot of players' enjoyment. The graphical design and sound are really great here, and exploring the various locations around Kitaria is a treat, but presentation aside, the actual substance of the story is very forgettable and never really pays off in any of the side missions or the main campaign. Characters you meet have interesting designs, but rarely, if ever, provide meaningful dialogue to draw me into their quests, creating handfuls of these hollow fetch quests that I'm really only completing for the off chance that I'll get rewarded with something cool. There are even a few particularly tedious quests in the game where you'll need to provide materials to unlock the next large section of the map. There are two of these quests, one to get into the southern desert region and another to get up into the northern snowy mountains. Each one requires you to acquire hard-to-attain materials, and you're only told about one material at a time, so instead of gathering the whole list, you're running back and forth to hand off stone, and then wood, and then shells, and so on. Not all of these quests are this bad, but they really don't get any more thoughtful than this at any point in Kitaria Fables. And this really segues well into my chief complaint about Kitaria Fables, and that's how tedious it is to get around the map, especially in the early game. Fast travel is very limited, even in the latest stages of the game, and most of the fast travel points are only one way for some reason. The problem is compounded by how slow your character's movement speed is and the fact that there are so few save points. Much later on, I was able to get the coveted banana leaf that gives you plus 50% movement speed, but I would have killed for either a mount system or just being able to fast travel from anywhere, as I really don't see how that would have detracted from the overall experience. And in regards to save points, there really are only a couple of places to save your game, with no exit save and no autosave at all. So if you need to save or shut down the game, you have to walk all the way back to one of these save points. The major redeeming factor in Kitaria Fables is the combat. This is definitely a casual game, so don't go in expecting, cat Dark Souls. But what does exist is a fun and addicting hack and slash, complete with spells, weapons, and iframe rolling. Like many things in Kitaria Fables, the early game is pretty tedious, and combat is no different. When the game starts out, you really only have access to your sword and can generally only fight one or two creatures at a time before getting overwhelmed. As the story progresses, however, you gain the bow and arrow and learn how to use magic from the schools of wind, earth, fire, and water. The sword and bow each have a handful of unique skills that can only be unlocked through quests or treasure chests found around the world that require rare keys to open, while the schools of magic have skills that can be learned through crafting at the sage's shop. The downside is that you can only have 4 skills equipped at a time, and you can only swap them at a couple designated locations on the map. But finding and testing out these new skills is a very satisfying part of the gameplay. All the damage is based on your current weapon plus any food buffs you have, and the late game spells and skills are super fun to land on foes. The skills in each weapon and school of magic felt unique to that tree and made for a great way to make my character unique. Sword and bow skills were all about straight damage. Fire also applied damage over time, water could freeze enemies, wind could push enemies around and contain a valuable heal spell, and earth, where I dumped almost all of my resources, did damage and stunned enemies. These skills become very useful in taking out larger mobs of enemies at one time, and especially necessary to take on the cast of bosses in the world. Most zones have a wandering optional boss that, when slain, drops much more valuable loot. Some even drop rare golden keys or special equipment like the King Gooey, who drops his magic resist crown, or the Dracoli that will occasionally drop the evil bone wings that provide 10% lifesteal. These drops create farming opportunities to keep trying to kill the same bosses over and over for the best loot, on top of all the farming you can already do to get crafting materials to upgrade your weapons and tools. This mechanic can also get tedious, but I found the combat enjoyable enough that I really didn't mind fighting the same monsters repeatedly. The last large mechanic that I'd like to bring up is the farming, which really feels tacked on in Kitaria Fables. This is definitely a casual action RPG first and foremost, and that's most clear in how the farming really has no impact on the rest of the game. There are a handful of side quests designed to get the player into farming, but it's never more intricate than please go plant these tomatoes. Like everything else, it does start off slow, and once you unlock farming, the starting tools are pretty lackluster. Crops don't really yield that much money until you can fill up at least half of your plot or more with them, and until you upgrade your tools, you can really only till and water a single square at a time. So I'd advise that you completely ignore it until you unlock silver and gold later on and the process becomes much quicker. You can also turn these crops into useful food items with nice buffs, but honestly, as a casual game, it's really not necessary to give yourself a 60-second buff in battle, and most players are just going to use it for gold income or not at all. You can pick up Kitaria Fables on Steam, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation, and Xbox when it launches tomorrow, September 2nd, 2021. And the Switch price has already been posted for $20, and while it's not quite worth that, it is still a solid game that comes pretty close. It's a beautiful looking game with a fun combat system that gets even better with its couch co-op. There's a huge list of enemies and bosses to fight that each have their own attacks and materials to farm, and there's just an overall hefty amount of things to dive into. However, while the world does look great, it's not particularly fun to explore, and the story rarely ever feels like it's going anywhere, and this tediousness, coupled with the uninspiring farming mechanics, is sure to drive many players away. So I'm valuing Kitaria Fables at $17, and I definitely recommend it to those interested in farming, crafting, fighting RPGs, as long as they're ready for a slower, more casual experience. I hope you enjoyed this review of Kitaria Fables. Come see me on Twitch where you can watch our reviews in progress 5 nights a week. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you thought about it. Until next time, peace!